As we arrive, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, into a new year full of grimdark hope and aspiration, it might not be immediately obvious how much is quietly taking shape right now in Warhammer 40,000 video games. True to form, Games Workshop continues to take pretty big swings, with major developments on the tabletop, a burgeoning media franchise, and as for the video game side of the Imperium, while there isn't just one major project on the horizon, there are several, spread across very different genres, being developed by studios with already proven track records. And honestly, if you're a fan of Warhammer 40,000 and you're a fan of video games, and why else would you be here, it is looking very much like good grimdark times ahead. I've done some homework on every new 40k video game currently in development, and if I've missed any out, please yell at me in the comments. I'll deserve it. Let's kick off with Dark Heresy, a brand new CRPG currently in development by Owlcat Games, who gave us the highly acclaimed and very well received swashbuckling romp on the edge of the Imperium in Rogue Trader. Rogue Trader proved that Owlcat could handle the setting without flattening it, leaning into faction politics, moral compromise, and long-term consequences, rather than treating 40k as just an excuse for combat encounters. Dark Heresy shifts the lens significantly. Instead of operating as a rogue trader with wealth, influence, and distance from Imperial authority, the focus moves much closer to the Inquisition. That implies a more constrained kind of power, more scrutiny, and a heavier emphasis on investigation, judgment, and consequences that don't stay neatly contained. Owlcat have a healthy track record in CRPGs, and one of their strengths has always been in reactive narrative and uncomfortable decision making, and this is a framework that naturally plays to that. If Rogue Trader was about navigating influence, Dark Heresy feels positioned to explore what happens when that influence is always conditional and always dangerous. The game has already wrapped up its first alpha test, early impressions are cautiously positive, and while there's no firm release date yet, the current estimate is late 2026, early 2027, and the game will be available on both PC and console. Prepare to judge, or be judged. From there, we move to a title that carries a lot of history. Dawn of War 4 was announced in August 2025, marking the return of one of the most influential Warhammer 40,000 video game franchises ever made. Dawn of War is synonymous with large-scale real-time strategy in the 40k space, and expectations here are understandably complex after the mixed reception of 2017's Dawn of War 3. That being said, for the first time, King Art Games will be taking over developer duties from Relic Entertainment, best known for the very well received Iron Harvest real-time strategy game. Everything we've seen so far from King Art suggests a more polished full RTS return for Dawn of War 4. Base building, large-scale engagements, skirmish and multiplayer modes are all back on the table. At launch, 4 factions are planned: Space Marines, Orcs, Necrons, and the Adeptus Mechanicus, the latter appearing in the Dawn of War series for the first time. Perhaps most notably, Dawn of War 4 will feature something no previous Warhammer 40k video game has done before: a playable Primarch. The Lion himself, Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the Dark Angels, who's only just returned to the setting in recent lore, is said to appear in a climactic controllable role. Not only that, alongside everyone's beloved Blood Ravens, the Dark Angels will also be a playable chapter in parts of the story campaign. Taken all together, it's clear this project is aiming high, both mechanically and thematically. It's currently slated for PC, targeting sometime in 2026, and while there's plenty still to be proven, this looks every bit like a serious attempt to re-establish a cornerstone franchise. Beyond that, one of the biggest announcements at the end of 2025 was Total War Warhammer 40k, which is now officially a thing, and even saying that out loud still feels a little surreal. This is being developed by Creative Assembly, the studio behind the long-running Total War franchise, and more importantly, the team responsible for the Warhammer Fantasy Trilogy, a body of work that, love it or hate it in places, fundamentally reshaped how Games Workshop properties could exist in strategy games. This is also where expectations need to be set carefully. Total War has always been about scale, positioning, logistics, and battlefield control. Translating that into the far future is not trivial. 40k setting is faster, more asymmetric, and far more technologically extreme than the rank-and-file fantasy warfare. But Creative Assembly aren't coming at this cold. They understand faction identity, they understand spectacle, and they understand how to make wildly different armies feel mechanically distinct. What makes this project genuinely interesting is not just the name, but the timing. This is a studio coming off a decade of Warhammer experience, now applying those lessons to a setting that arguably suits large-scale conflict even better. We don't yet know whether this leans more toward traditional total war structure, something closer to apocalypse scale engagements, or an entirely new hybrid approach, but the fact that it exists at all and is being handled in-house by CA makes it one of the most consequential 40k game announcements in years. This will be available on PC and console, still early in public detail, and very much a long-term play, but it's hard to overstate how important it could be if it lands. Staying on the subject of studios returning to familiar ground, we also have Mechanicus II, currently in development by Boltgun Studios. The original Mechanicus was a solid first attempt at putting the tech priests of Mars front and center, capturing the cold, ritualistic nature of the Adeptus Mechanicus, pairing it with a genuinely excellent soundtrack, and wrapping it all in a tight, turn-based tactics framework that rewarded patience and positioning. Mechanicus II builds directly on that foundation, but now with an exciting twist. Not only will you be able to continue playing as the Adeptus Mechanicus, but now the Necrons are also fully playable, each with a distinct narrative campaign that players can switch between, and early previews emphasize the tactical depth this dual campaign structure enables. Following feedback from demos, Bulwark have restored one of the first game's most beloved elements, the binaric machine code inflected language of the Mechanicus themselves. In addition, the game introduces environmental mechanics such as cover, destructible terrain, and expanded resource systems to influence tactical decision making, while other non-playable factions will make an appearance, and any more detail than that is deep in spoiler territory. This isn't about chasing scale, it's about fidelity, mechanical, tonal, and thematic. The current release window is spring 2026 on PC and console, and if the sequel can preserve the first game's identity while meaningfully expanding its systems and narrative scope, it has the potential to raise the bar even further. Of course, despite the fact that there really isn't much information out there yet, we simply wouldn't get very far if we didn't acknowledge that Space Marine 3 is officially in development. Saber Interactive's Space Marine 2 did exactly what it needed to do. It proved that there is still a very real appetite for big, unapologetic third-person 40k action when it's executed at a modern standard. Massive Tyranid swarms, oppressive Chaos Marines and demons, delightfully weighty combat, a hefty campaign, and a sense of scale that finally did the setting justice. Space Marine 3 is still light on concrete details, but its announcement at this early stage and existence alone signals confidence, both from Saber and from Games Workshop. The Space Marine series is no longer a one-off revival, it's a pillar. The challenge now is escalation without excess. Bigger does not automatically mean better, and the real test will be whether the sequel can deepen its systems and pacing without losing the clarity that has made Space Marine 2 so effective. It's early days, nowhere near a release date yet, but this is clearly a core franchise for the future of 40k games. A very different kind of sequel is coming in the form of Boltgun 2, being developed once again by Auroch Digital. The original Boltgun was a love letter to old school shooters, but it succeeded not just because of nostalgia, it worked because it married that boomer shooter energy to a very specific, very sincere take on 40k's brutality. Boltgun 2 looks set to double down on that identity while expanding the power fantasy. Not only will we see the return of the Ultramarines' first company Sternguard veteran, Malum Kado, but he will now be joined by another playable character in the shape of Naira Veyrath, a Celestian sister of Basil of the Adeptus Sororitas. This isn't a radical reinvention, but it is a meaningful evolution, introducing a very different combat flavour and faction perspective, nastier enemies, more elaborate levels and variety, and a continued commitment to over-the-top violence filtered through that deliberately retro lens. Boltgun 2 is set to be released on PC and console sometime in 2026, and Auroch Digital have proven they understand the setting so well, they are also hard at work on Warhammer Survivors. In partnership with indie developer Ponkel, best known for Vampire Survivors, Warhammer Survivors takes inspiration from the now well-established roguelite survivor style formula and drops it squarely into both the 41st millennium and the Age of Sigmar. Yes, one of those rare games where players can choose which of the two realms they want to play in. This is a smaller scale project, but not an insignificant one. These kinds of games live or die on feel, responsiveness, enemy density, and moment-to-moment satisfaction, and early signs suggest this is being handled with care rather than cynicism. Consider this one a palate cleanser, modest in scope, but potentially very effective at what it sets out to do, and will be available on PC, console, and mobile sometime in 2026. Finally, an honourable mention goes out to Supremacy Warhammer 40,000 by Stillfront Supremacy Games. This is a mobile-first grand strategy title, and yes, I know mobile is a loaded word for a lot of people. Supremacy is not new to this space, and their previous strategy titles have leaned heavily into long-term planning, alliance play, and persistent maps, and the 40k setting is ripe in terms of scope and lore. Let's just hope that aggressive monetization and pay-to-win tactics don't become prevalent. The game will eventually be available on PC as well, and after being pushed back, is currently slated to release in March 2026. Taken all together, what stands out here is not just volume, but intent. These projects are spread across genres, scales, and tones. Lore-packed CRPGs, real-time combat and strategy, cinematic action, turn-based tactics, retro shooters, and smaller experimental formats. And they're largely being handled by studios who have already demonstrated that they understand either the setting, the genre, or ideally both. This doesn't guarantee success, nothing ever does, but it does mean that Warhammer 40,000 games are no longer relying on just one or two titles at a time to carry the banner. There's breadth here, and there's direction, and if you're a fan of the setting, or someone who's been waiting for 40k to fully stretch its legs in the digital space, it's hard not to look at what's coming and feel quietly optimistic. And if I've missed anything, genuinely, yell at me in the comments. I really will deserve it.